Apprehensive, nervous, we're exhausted. I think that in general, a lot of people want to get these Olympics over and done with as little incidents as possible. It's been a very difficult road to get here. These are not the games we expected, not the ones we had hoped for, not the ones we planned for, but they're here. And I think that we all just want to get to the finish line. That's the goal.
And disappointment, I would expect, because there won't be any fans to enjoy them in person.
Absolutely. I think that this was going to be a spectacle. This was everything that Japan and that Tokyo had planned for over the last decade. If you look at the infrastructure improvements to the capital, everything that went into being able to welcome hundreds of thousands of foreign fans to Tokyo and have them enjoy everything it has to offer and everything Japan has to offer. You look at how successful the 2019 Rugby World Cup was and how that was sort of the precursor. We thought that was a dress rehearsal for the Olympics when it turns out that those 240,000 or so fans who came from overseas, they were really lucky because they're the last ones who got to enjoy things pre-pandemic.
And the Japanese are always very organized and a very proud people. But polls in Japan, as you know from the Japan Times, have shown many wanted the games to be cancelled. Was that your feeling too?
The polling has been complicated, especially if you look at how the goalposts have shifted over the last few months, with postponement no longer an option, asking respondents if they want the games to be held with fans or without fans. So the goalposts have shifted, expectations have been lowered, and I think that the public realizes at this point, with less than 2 weeks to go, I guess a week to go at this point, that they are happening, and I think everyone just wants them to happen safely, and that's now the biggest concern.
And introducing a state of emergency can't have helped.
Well, this is our fourth state of emergency here in Tokyo. We've gotten used to it. A state of emergency in Japan, it isn't as strict as the lockdowns experienced in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and some other countries around the world. At this point, the only real restriction is that bars and restaurants have to close at 8 p.m. and they aren't allowed to serve alcohol. But museums are open, theaters are open, shopping malls and department stores are open. Life is somewhat similar to as it was before COVID, not quite as crowded, certainly not nearly as many tourists, but everyone is wearing their masks and getting on with their day. So the debate here has been, well, if you can have spectators at football games, at baseball games, at the sumo tournament that's ongoing, why can't you have fans at the Olympics? And a lot of what you're seeing is these last-minute decisions to eliminate fans from the games, that has been sort of in response to public perception. So it is very complicated, and I think that the outsider view of what's happening in Japan doesn't always quite have all of the information that we do, and there is a perception issue, I feel.
A perception issue about what, Dan?
About how Japan has handled this pandemic and handled the Olympics compared to how other countries have handled large sporting events. If you look at how the European Championships had fans in stadiums around, I believe, 11 or 12 countries, and a lot of those have now sort of turned into these super spreader events. And yet, there hasn't been nearly as much backlash towards UEFA for hosting the Euros as there has been to Japan for hosting the Olympics. Now, obviously, that's a question of scale. You don't have 200 plus countries coming to the Euros. You only have 32, I believe it is. But it's different. I think that Japan is sometimes judged by a bit of a double standard. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been missteps. That's not to say that the government has gotten all of the pandemic response right. That's not to say that organizers have gotten everything right. But at this point, I think that the Olympics are doing the best with what they can, and I don't particularly think that any country in the world is in the best position to hold the Olympics, but of those countries, Japan is the most able to, if that makes sense.
Dan Orlowitz, many thanks for joining us from Tokyo on The Agenda.
No problem. Thank you for having me.